Welcome to The Life You're Made For with me, Dr. Heather Penny. We're going to be having conversations that talk about us spiraling up versus spiraling down, because we all want to be living lives that are about thriving, not just surviving. This is the life you're made for. So let's get going. I am so excited to have Dr. Lisa Smith with us here today. Hi, Lisa.
Hello, Heather.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Good. She is a professor at Pepperdine University, which I was also kind of secretly excited about since my son goes there and he's actually a sophomore. He just finished up his freshman year. So we've been talking a little bit about Pepperdine news, and it's so fun to have you here on the show today.
Well, thanks. I'm excited to be here, and I'm always happy to talk Pepperdine or anything else.
Well, before we jump in, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we'll have our discussion around some stuff that we were already starting to discuss before I press record.
Sounds good. I'm originally from the East Coast, Heather, from Mid-Atlantic area, Maryland, Delaware kind of area. But I came to Southern California in 2005. Came out for my husband's job, but ended up really loving it. And so we've stayed. I have two sons. One is graduating this month. So that's exciting. Graduated from college, I should say. And the other one is married and just had our first grandbaby, a little granddaughter. Yeah. So
you do not look old enough to be a grandmother.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I'm hoping I'm carrying the baby around somewhere and somebody says to me, "Oh, is that your baby?" And just appears completely shocked when I say, "No, it's my granddaughter."
Oh,
no, that's been super fun. It's been super fun. She's only a couple months old, but wow, what a delight and what a unique experience to see your own child have a child. It's so different.
I can't even imagine it. That's my next stage in life after I just launched my kids to college. So I'm like, grandmother's next. I just can't even imagine it.
Yeah. It surprises you when it comes, but it's fun.
Yes.
But as my day job, I work as an English professor at Pepperdine, as you said. My specialty is early American literature. So that's literature from about 1600 to about 1800. So just maybe a little past the American Revolution. And it's a lot of nonfiction. You know, we didn't really have novels or short stories or anything like that. So you have to think everybody before Nathaniel Hawthorne, Edgar Allan Poe, Emily Dickinson, everybody before that. So we're talking Benjamin Franklin, the theologian Jonathan Edwards, the poet Phillis Wheatley, a lot of Puritans, a lot of people writing actually their own stories, writing about their own experiences, either coming to the colonies or indigenous peoples who were living in the colonies, their encounter experiences, what it was like being in the settlements, travel narratives, the animals and plants they discovered. So a lot of kind of life writing or self-writing, maybe their spiritual experiences, all kinds of things. That's the sort of stuff I work on. And I specifically lean a little bit more toward the spiritual experiences of people. There was a lot of religion, specifically Christianity, in the colonies in the early days, pre-1800s. So I look at kind of those spiritual communities, and there was more diversity than we realize spiritually in the colonies at that time. So those are some of the things that I teach and write about.
I love that. I already have a billion questions for you. I love the history stuff too, and I don't have time to read much on it. But in my work, as a leadership coach, I know you got to take a peek at my book there, but as a leadership coach, I believe everybody has their own clarity, confidence, courage inside of them. It's how we access it and how we draw it out. And one of the things that I really look at is the holistic person, mind, body, heart, spirit. So what I was intrigued to talk with you about today, because when I coach people one-on-one, I am taking a look at that. I'm not just telling them the 5 points of communication or 5 points of good leadership, although that's important and that's the mind piece. I'm really making sure that we're taking care of the whole person. So tell us a little bit about what you're learning as you have studied. I know you're looking at George Whitfield, particularly. Is that what you're writing your book on now?
Yes. And actually, just today, I sent a draft of the manuscript to the editor. So I'm really getting to the end of it. Yes, very exciting. It should come out this year. But actually, Heather, you would be best friends with George Whitfield, because in terms of clarity, confidence, and courage, he really embodies it. He was a little bit before our time. So he was in the 18th century. He was born around 1714 and died in 1770. So he lived right in the middle of that kind of real modern century, the 18th century. And he was a minister in England, minister of the Church of England. But more interestingly, he was one of the first kind of international celebrities in the West. He was a phenomenal preacher, super innovative, super dramatic. Instead of just getting up and reading his sermons, like a lot of ministers would at the time, he presented them extemporaneously. He asked the audience questions. He would burst into tears. He would tell stories. He had a real awareness of audience and how to bring them a message. And he went to everyone. I mean, he preached outside in the fields, which ministers didn't usually do because the churches literally couldn't contain the number of people. He went to the poorhouses. He went to the workhouses. He went to the coal miners. He really was innovative. He was passionate, but he had a really focused message. And his focused message was, you don't have to go through the motions of religion. You can have an authentic spiritual experience that means something for you and that you can take ownership of. And so he preached on what at the time in the 18th century, he would have called the new birth, the idea that you can have such a dramatic transformation spiritually and in other ways that your whole life can be transformed and you can step into clarity, confidence, and courage because of the spiritual experience. So he was just innovative, interesting. He caught my attention. I've been teaching him for a while. Even though he was English, he made 7 trips to America, and he's actually buried in America. He's buried in Newburyport, Massachusetts, where he died. Yeah, they have a whole crypt in the church and everything. It's the Old South Presbyterian Church, I believe. But I loved his life of passion. And so I've been talking to students about, how did he create this life of passion? How did he create this life? Like I'm saying, it's a perfect match with the things you do with people individually or in a seminar setting. But we're looking at, how did he get his calling and how did he step into it? And so the book is trying to kind of combine, the book I'm writing, the best of a biography and the best of kind of a collection of writings. So it's looking specifically at his passion for God and for people and for what he's doing in the world. But it includes retellings of important, interesting events in his life, combined with excerpts from his writing, because his voice is just dramatic. He wrote journals. He wrote, published his sermons. He wrote autobiographies. We have almost 2,000 of his letters. So I'm bringing all those writings together along with kind of seminal events in his life to just try to do an examination of how somebody leans into just a passionate life.
Wow. And you're right. That's how you access the clarity, confidence, and courage. You can, and this is the big secret, or I hope it's not a secret as much anymore, is people can grow their clarity and their confidence and their courage. That's what my strongest message I can get out there is you actually can grow it. You're not a victim to whatever amount of clarity you might have just been handed in life. It's something that you can foster and you can actually cultivate it. And in all 3 areas, and those are just 3 taglines. Of course, you can cultivate so many other things in your life, but I've tried to use those 3 taglines because I do believe that's what helps us step into a life that we're really feel passionately that we're made for. But we were
and I like those. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Because I like those taglines because it does take all of those things. And I was struck for Whitfield for the clarity, because he did, in the book, I do talk about how when he was young, in his early 20s, he took some time alone to really zone in on what was important to him, what his values were. Also, the confidence, he created a network of people who supported him, and the courage. He was really strongly opposed by other ministers of the Church of England who wanted him to do things the same old way. They were really threatened by the way he was doing things. So all those pieces came together in his life. And you're right, he developed them. He didn't pop out of the womb having those things. He worked on them. He brought people into his life to help him. He tried and failed at things and changed things up. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And that's why I like teaching this stuff to the emerging adults that I teach at college, because you don't have to have it all figured out by 18. You can learn the skills, exactly like what your book emphasizes, learn the skills to grow in these areas.
Yeah. And we were joking beforehand, like we're both academic writers, but I don't know about you. I didn't have a huge rush on people wanting to read my dissertation.
Right.
I don't even think I got my parents to read it. So I think me and my chair were the only ones who probably read it. Maybe my husband, I probably forced him to read it, pericopes of it, just so he could give me some insight on it. But I think we were kind of joking before. You do all that work and you're like, why are we doing this work? We do want to help make it accessible to the average person. The goal for academia, it should be that we are not trying to just stay in our ivory towers. We're trying to take information that we're learning that will make our humanity better. And as Maria Shriver says, it moves from humanity forward. And I think as you're doing this work and taking all your research and trying to make it into a accessible, I love that you're doing that. It's already making me want to read the book, and I can't wait to read the book. But tell us a little bit about how that journey's gone.
Yeah, that's a fun journey to be on. And I know that you understand the journey, because I wasn't 3 or 4 pages into your book and I started noticing all the questions you asked, the worksheets, the examples, the allegory that carries throughout with the young girl with the bracelets. I mean, I could tell that you were an academic who had taken your research and really thought about the things you have to add to it to make it accessible to people and make it really hit home. So I'm trying to do the same sort of thing with Whitfield. I'm trying to modernize the excerpts. I'm trying to have a lot of kind of introductory material. I'm trying to create a picture of his life that people can understand, even though it happened in the 18th century. We all understand opposition. We all understand the need for community. We all understand that moment when we're not quite sure, are we following what we really are calling what we really want. So I'm trying to humanize him and bring him down to just to say, look, we all have these struggles, whether we're an 18th century minister or a 21st century college student or mom or corporate executive. And I actually tried it for the first time in the book I wrote before the Whitfield book, which is called Godly Characters. And it says, it's called Insight for Spiritual Passion from the lives of 8 women in the Bible. And what I tried to do there was take what I do as a professor with stories, with narratives. And I looked at 8 stories in the Bible. I chose 8 women, just because I feel like they don't get a lot of press. It isn't necessarily a book for women, but but it's about traits like courage, generosity, tenacity, vision. And I picked one woman for each of these traits. Half of them aren't even named in the Bible. They're very little known women, but I tried to access their stories. I tried to flesh out their stories, make them come alive, which is what I try to do in the classroom, with narratives and stories that we read. So it's been kind of a fun journey the last couple books that I've done, where I'm trying to take things that I study in a certain way in the classroom and just bring them to the modern reader in a way that will help them apply what they're doing. In a way, it's a little bit like your worksheets and, a permission slip, all the pieces that you have in your book to help people access the teachings. I'm kind of trying to do that. I'm trying to help them access these people of passion who impacted their world in so many different ways. I'm trying to say, what do they have in common? What are their traits? How can we lean into this?
Oh, I love it. I'm going to ask you a hard question, so I'll buy you a little bit of time.
Okay, pop quiz.
Well, it's a hard question for a researcher because we love all the different angles. And I don't know about you, but when I would get into all the literature reviews and I would just speak, I'd have to put a boundary on it because I could just go down so many trails. And I think about my research. There was so much research and conversation around people spiraling down, and particularly into depression, anxiety, and even the psychotropic meds that we're seeing really exponentially growing in our country. And North America is probably one of the fastest growing, and we're trying to figure out what's happening. It's being called by social researchers as a social kind of pandemic that's happening. And even like I just know there was a recent conversation at the government level about loneliness coming out now too, is the new pandemic. So, and I think one of the, and I'm getting to the question, I promise, but I think one of the things that I had to ask myself is, what's the whole purpose of this research? And this is what I kind of kept thinking about in all those hours and years of trying to get through it, was if we've learned how to spiral down, logically, we can learn how to spiral up. And that was my big focus, that if anything that I could put out in this world, I feel like it's the life that I'm made for. How do I help people feel empowered, not dependent on me or anyone else, but to recognize they hold that kind of agency of self within them to begin the spiraling up. So that's why I use clarity, confidence, courage as like handles to pull up on, and how to cultivate that. So I guess I would ask you the same question. As you are looking at your research and you're studying these women, you're studying George Whitefield. I want to call him Wakefield. Whitefield, excuse me. What's kind of your big heartbeat that you're focusing on that you want to put out there in the world?
Yeah, that is a good question, because you can get really caught up in the research, and when you're wired that way, if you end up getting a PhD, you are wired for details, and you're wired to go deep in really specific areas. And sometimes you do have to pull back and say, wait a minute, what am I even doing? And I would say one of the biggest motivators for me is what I do see in the students. The fact that there is a lot of things that we're concerned about with this generation, anxiety and insecurity and that kind of thing, and isolation, loneliness. But one thing this generation does have is they want something to be passionate about. They are not the kind who are just going to go through the motions. I mean, they really aren't. I did certain things because my mom told me to, and that's what we all did, me and my friends. But they're not like that. They're seeking for something that really enervates and energizes them. They're wanting to bring something from their unique personality and who they are, and we joke about it sometimes, older generations, and say, hey, sometimes you just have to take a job. But I think they're really onto something. They want to have a passion. And so I've actually tried in my teaching and my writing to sort of look throughout history for these people who are passionate. I teach a class at Pepperdine, or I have in past years, called Gender and Spirituality, and in the 18th century, or in early America. And honestly, what I do is I pull out these people who just did really amazing and different things. Often they're energized by spirituality, but not always. And it just comes out in strong ways. A Native American who decides he wants to be a minister and ends up becoming internationally known. A young woman who is enslaved in Boston from Africa, but becomes the first Black American to have a book of poetry published. Women who maybe didn't have a voice in other places. One of them wants to write comments on the U.S. Constitution and have it published. So I look for these people who have passion. And I've done it in the classroom, but kind of like you, when you've done it enough with individuals, you've got a foundation to then bring it in book form. And I all the examples you give from your life coaching and your own teaching, your book is chock full of them, and it fleshes everything out in a way that makes it amazing for the reader. I'm kind of trying to do the same thing when I do this writing. I'm really not trying to write like a researcher. I'm trying to write like a teacher. I actually say to myself, put your teacher hat on. What is interesting about George Whitfield? What is interesting about these women in the Bible and their situations? What will galvanize and sort of excite and bring hope to a generation? And it doesn't just have to be young people. All of us need to see, I think, examples of people who are overcoming adversity and who are really stepping into who they really are. So that, I guess, I would say is kind of my heartbeat. I really do, which is why I liked your book for the emerging adults I teach. I really want them to find out who they are. And you don't have to find it all by 22, but you can find some pieces. Like you say, as long as you have some pieces and the willingness to grow and some of the growing skills, you can continue to go from there, and you can have a strong basis.
Yeah. And I often joke, I wrote the book for me, because this is, we learn so much about our passions, but it makes us get ourselves organized, doesn't it? When we're forced to put it into writing to share with the world. Yep. And it helped me kind of document and keep it clear with what did allow me to step into a life that I made for, which did allow me to really have the clarity and the confidence and courage to go independent and to open my own coaching company and to think that I could do something that I didn't know anything about. And to be successful at 15 years later and to see the outcome of that, I'm thinking back, I'm like, how did I do that? And what was I taught about my own inner resiliency and my own inner grit? And where did when I was shaky, what did I do about that? And this was all what I studied when I started studying my participants, did a qualitative research. I said, what caused you to spiral up when you transitioned from school to work? We already know that there was a tremendous gap there of why we were spiraling down. But I interviewed people then between their 30s and 50s to look back, because we don't know what we don't know in our 20s.
Yeah, right. That's right.
But to be able to reflect back and say, what made you spiral up and what made you get out of the downward spiral? Because we have enough conversations around the downward spiral, and they are important. I don't mean to diminish them, but we didn't have enough conversations. It kept saying more research is needed, more research is needed. So I think I've loved putting this into a language so that we can start having that conversation that empowers individuals. And I wrote down a couple of words you were saying: galvanizing hope and passion and overcoming adversity. I mean, wow. Yeah. So you're probably drawn to these historical figures that were passionate, knew how to kind of galvanize their community around them, that probably had a lot of hits, but knew how to keep rising above it. I mean, no one writes the book about the person who keeps failing and never rises back up again, right? So right. I'm just hearing all that. I just love it. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you kind of presented a structure for me to talk about it in your book when you talk about the crossroads idea, because, we all have situations in life, and we have some good and we have some bad, and, but they can be seen as a crossroads, or I think you even called at one point holding tensions. It's how do we look at those times? Can we look at them as opportunities for growth? And we can't always. I mean, there are just sometimes I need to go into my bed and cry, and I'm not going to overcome a darn thing that day.
Right.
That's just reality.
Netflix is our friend.
Yeah, exactly. And that's okay. But if we look over a lifetime, how do I face the crossroads? How do I face the times of the tension where, okay, this isn't going to be perfect, but how do I move forward? And I think that's actually why I'm kind of intrigued by spirituality specifically, because as you mentioned in the beginning, the best way to move forward is a holistic approach to ourselves. And that's actually what we talk about at Pepperdine University. Spirituality can be a part of your life. And what I find with spirituality, when I look at it through some of these people's lives, is it gives them something that empowers them, because it's something beyond themselves. And I know you address it briefly in your book, but for a wider audience who maybe aren't people of faith, I think there's still something to looking beyond yourself, and it's uncomfortable.
Yes,
but it's uncomfortable because it is beyond yourself. Yeah. So what I'm seeing, with these people of faith is they struggle with the questions. They struggle with life. They struggle with the questions of their faith. And they don't understand everything in their faith, just like they don't understand everything in their lives. But they do have something beyond themselves. And for some of us, it might be values. It might be family. It might be relationships. You talk about the gift of givers. We need to look outside ourselves for something. And for me, I find the spirituality piece very intriguing, because it does move people beyond what they normally would be able to do, because they feel secure, they feel confident, they feel like there's something bigger than them, holding them, guiding them, and helping them move forward.
Gosh, I love that you brought that up. I wasn't sure how to address that in my book, because as a person of faith, and my faith is important to me, my spirituality is important to me, I wanted to be so respectful, because spirituality and faith have so many different faces. I didn't want anyone to feel like they had to have the same look as mine. And yet at the same hand, I didn't want to not not talk about it because I felt like, yeah, that did take me to the next level. And that's why I ended the book with just a personal note from the author. And it was the most respectful way that I felt like I could do it for my readers to say, my clarity, my confidence, courage, you can do all this on your own and it will grow. But I would be remiss. It almost feels like dishonest with you if I didn't tell you that my spirituality grew, my clarity, my confidence, my courage exponentially. And that's often how I've described it too. It's something beyond yourself. I'm a huge fan of the 12 steps, and I can't remember which step it is, 2 or 3, but it's saying reaching out to a higher power. To me, I call this higher power God, but of course, it's love. So even if you're working out your spirituality and faith, and this is for all the listeners, I know I have people in all different stages in their faith and their spirituality. I'm trying to normalize the fact that spirituality is a very normal part of our holistic being. And it doesn't necessarily have to be connected to a religion. Religion's very human made. Spirituality is something we hold inside of us. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Because you've really, really gone down that journey. I'd love to hear you talk more about that one.
Yeah, that's a great question and a great topic. I personally loved how you did it in the book. I thought it was very respectful, and I agree with you that it's a balancing act because in our culture, we don't want people to feel uncomfortable when we talk about certain topics, and religion can be one. But at the same time, in our culture, we also value authenticity, we value genuineness, and we value transparency and true communication.
Right.
So, if I'm reading your book and I'm listening to the things you've been learning and that you've researched, I do want to know where you're coming from in a respectful way. So I completely agree that the way you did it was a good choice. And I actually try to do that with my freshmen. I teach a first year seminar, which is just a class for first semester freshmen called Spiritual Autobiography. And I include all kinds of spiritualities in it: Christian, Jewish, Muslim, even like, well, I have Benjamin Franklin in there as a deist, Marcus Aurelius as a Stoic. Like there's all, people just coming from different places. And sometimes students will come into the class and say, oh, I'm afraid I'm not going to do well. I'm not spiritual. It's not interesting to me. And I understand that. And I try to say from the very beginning, you know what? We are spiritual people. There will be different seasons in our lives where we will access that more or less. Some students in here have already really strengthened their spiritual lives, and that's important to them. Others haven't. Others might want to just invest in it now and think about it, apply it later. I don't know. But there's an element, as you say, holistically, there's an element of us that is spiritual. So I just try to present that class as kind of what I've been saying in other aspects, hearing people's stories. Where do these people come from? How does spirituality help them? And there's a lot of diversity in spirituality. And I try to include assignments that aren't assignments that ask them to give me all the right answers, but are introspective. So they write a spiritual autobiography. And it doesn't have to be about a certain kind of spirituality. It can be things they value, strong principles they hold. I had one excellent one a couple semesters ago. A student wrote about how surfing and his love for the ocean got him through his mother's passing. I had one write about music. It doesn't just have to be kind of the traditional spirituality, but many are. I have them do what I call a spiritual journey interview, where they interview someone else about their spiritual journey. Some students pick people who are really alike to them, and others pick ones that are completely different. So I try to include that element. And I think that kind of touches on what you're saying. The best way to have a conversation about spirituality is with respect, but also openness. If I'm a very spiritual person, I want someone to know that. I'm not expecting them to be, but it's something that we can at least agree on, that it's a part of being human. And depending on what season of our life we're in, and maybe our background, whatever it may come to the fore, more or less, that's where I'm trying to meet students.
I love that. And I think in the work that I do, I've been surprised, you step into a new line of work. My background, of course, is education, moving in more of leadership coaching and individual coaching and group coaching. And I think I've been surprised at people's awareness around spirituality, but more importantly, those that have been really hurt by religious groups And I guess I want to just speak to that for a minute. If you have decided that you are not wanting to be a partake in religion or anything like that, does that cost you your spirituality, Lisa?
That's a good question. And it's an interesting question for me because I teach a lot of 18th century writers who don't really question or don't really consider stepping outside of their spiritual tradition. They might, but they certainly don't have as much of the mindset today that they can kind of forge their own spirituality, which is kind of more what students feel like they want to do at the age they're at. They haven't always had great experiences with their church or their synagogue or their family experience with religion. And so they're not quite sure what to do. Does that mean they have to abandon spirituality? And so I do try to show them when I teach some different people from the past and we look at some of their writings, I try to show them how some people find their way within the tradition and some people step outside. I teach a woman named Elizabeth Ashbridge, who in the 18th century was raised an Anglican. Church of England just didn't match her. She ended up joining kind of a sort of offshoot of Christianity called the Quakers, they were much more open to women actually being pastors. She ended up becoming a leader in the Quaker movement. So she wanted to stay in the Christian tradition, but she chose one that kind of fit her better. So I tell students it's okay to explore. It's okay to ask God questions. It's okay to be open and to try new things. But I also, and this is where not to go back to my comment about your gift of givers, I do caution them that they also do want to surround themselves with people who can speak into their lives, because it's okay to be a Lone Ranger spiritualist and completely forge your own way. But it's a little bit better maybe to have someone help you build up the parts of your spiritual life that are weak, or work through some of the pain you've had spiritually, or work through some of your questions. So don't feel like you have to completely go it alone to make it your own.
Oh, I love that.
You can bring people along for the journey and stay true to yourself. Elizabeth Ashbridge is a perfect example of this. She left Anglicanism and wandered, tried different things, but always kept reading, kept talking to people, kept bringing people in on her journey, and eventually landed where she actually did great. She ended up being a leader in the Pennsylvania kind of mid-Atlantic area. She was one of the Quaker leaders, and we have her story today. So I guess that's what I say to students. You can make it your own, but you don't have to do it on your own.
Oh, that's great. It makes me think. I was just listening to Richard Rohr today, and he was talking about staying congruent with the community that you're in and with the internal shift that's happening within you. And I just thought it was such a beautiful, simple permission that says sometimes we outgrow these religious communities because our spirituality is shifting and growing. And I think instead of trying to either make it work or go the other extreme and leave them all together, there is a beautiful middle ground that says there are other groups out there that are going to support your spirituality and your inner growth and provide more of a framework around you that will allow you to continue to grow in the direction you're growing without making you feel incongruent. And I think that's where people have gotten hurt, to be honest, that they've been told they have to think a certain way about whatever theology or even God, and they're not allowed to have their own personal thoughts on it that says, yeah, but this doesn't feel good because I'm either outgrown it, or I don't agree with this, or this isn't what I feel when I'm surfing on a Sunday morning. What is it that's happening inside of us that's allowing us to make that connection with our divine presence that I do believe lives within each of us?
Yeah, it's an excellent point. And I for me, one of the most important pieces of that step of looking where you are and deciding, okay, maybe I need something else, is not really criticizing and damning where you were. And I'm sure you see this as a life coach. We move into something new, and it's hard to move into something new, but we do it, right? We make a shift. And then there's almost this natural human response to turn around and say, well, that was stupid. Why did I ever do that? No, that time had that time in your life had a place, had meaning, had a moment. What Elizabeth Ashbridge got from the Church of England were certain things that she learned about God and Jesus and that she appreciated about Christianity. But to continue to evolve, she had to be in a place where, in her case, women had more opportunities to speak in church meetings, to follow the guidance of what the Quakers called the inner light, as you're speaking to there. So we don't need to look back and feel like, oh, I made a mistake or they're completely wrong. No, they were a step on your journey. They were a stone on your path. Like you say, take it, move with it, and evolve into the next thing. And it's really hard to evolve spiritually, professionally, relationally, in any way without some change, without moving into something new. You know that for a fact. So spiritually is the same way. Appreciate what you had. And when it's time to move on, use it as a foundation for the next step.
Yes. And don't be afraid of the uncomfortableness. One of the phrases I use quite a bit is be comfortable with the uncomfortableness, because we don't change when we're comfortable. We change when we're uncomfortable. So the uncomfortableness is usually signaling to us that we've outgrown something. And if we overstay, we just get angry, resentful, bitter, blaming. We've all my fingers are pointing back. I've done that myself because I've tried to make it myself fit, into something that doesn't fit me anymore. So I think the quicker you can recognize this isn't a fit, kind of bless and release, saying, thank you so much. I've outgrown this and I'm ready to kind of level up another area. And I need to be surrounded by people that are leveling up in these same areas and asking some of these same questions. Not that we have the answers, but we are certainly trying to figure out those answers. And if we're with a community that's asking a different set of questions, it can be so incongruent and very maddening. And this is where I see a lot of people get angry and frustrated and stuck. And to learn to give yourself that permission to just say, oh, I think I've outgrown it, I think is really powerful. Let's talk about clarity.
But clarity. And the other thing too, that I wanted to mention, I liked in the beginning of your book, your idea of restorative rest.
Yeah.
And that's something that my students notice about the 18th century. There were a lot of people in those days who took time in the morning, took time before they went to bed at night, think through their day, rest their minds, maybe look at a sacred text that's important to them, like something like that. They notice that these people are introspective and they're thoughtful. They don't shame themselves. They just try to think through different things. And I feel like that piece in your book, particularly, I think it was in the clarity section, is very important, because it's hard to get clarity when you have 10,000 voices yelling at you, right? Yep. You have to, and that's what I talk to students about when I mentor them, not in the classroom, but when I mentor them. How do you still and quiet the voices? How do you kind of come to that calm place where the divine presence in you can speak, where your own voice can be heard, where you can kind of quiet the noise? And that's big for students right now. It's mindfulness, and they're learning that, and they're realizing the importance of it.
Yeah. Oh, well said. And a quick snapshot about that for our listeners. The clarity has to do with rest. You're right on. I think I spent 6 chapters trying to really reinforce, if you don't pull over your car, it's not going to go well for you. You got to get your map out. Confidence has to do with what you believe. So really checking your beliefs. And then courage has to do with where you take action and how you take action. And that's what moves us forward and gets us out of those stuck places.
Yeah, exactly. Interestingly, for Whitfield, it tended to happen on sea voyages. When he would travel to America, he came to America 7 times. So that's 13. He never made it back to England. So 13 sea voyages, if you count back and forth, anywhere from 6 weeks to 11 weeks at a pop. And if you look at his journals from the early years, especially, he used those sea voyages as like this little break time. And he was quite intentional in resting, just spending time reading, that sort of thing. So we don't have sea voyages today, but I don't know. Airline flights or the commute to work or, making dinner, whatever it is, those little periods that we can build into our lives for rest.
Yeah, a great point, because we have to build it in. Our life moves at such a fast pace that honestly, the number one place I'm coaching people at, because usually the time they get to me, they're exhausted, they're fried, they're stuck, they know it's not working, they just don't know what else to do. Really reminding them that they have to find rest. And sometimes it's like an act of Congress where I have to really convince them of the importance of this, because they've been running so much on adrenaline. And yet to tell them to pull over and relax feels very scary for them or counterintuitive, and they're afraid that they'll just lose more ground and get further behind the pack,
Yeah, and that's especially true for emerging adults.
Yeah.
They're having things put in their head like, wait, that first job has to be great and perfect, and you've got to get to the top school, and you've got to have 3 majors, and they really think that, well, I'm going to get behind, or I'm going to lose something if I build rest. And I mean, what's rest going to do, right?
Yeah.
So that's where courage comes in.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get the clarity, you'll get the confidence if you are courageous enough to stop. Yeah, exactly. You
got my book, man. You go speak for me, Lisa.
I love your book. I'm in the trenches with your book. I mean, I'm not a life coach, but I'm with students, and I care about them beyond being students. They're young adults. They're the future, of the world. And I believe in them. I'm excited about what they bring. And so I'm excited, we're coming at it in different places. Your book is great. It's direct and has tools. I'm trying to come to it more from maybe an example, inspiration place where they can see that, you can do this too. People have done it throughout history. So yeah, I think we have that same passion to kind of lean into young people, old people, whoever, but help them get excited about what they bring. We need everyone. I mean, look at our world right now. Look at our country. We need, we recognize we need everyone. So no one's indispensable.
Oh, amen to that. And I cannot wait to read your book. So I will be keeping a pulse on that and hounding you for it. I have my new book coming out too called Grace Space. And that's to create stories of grace around us, and that we all have the power to do that. We don't have to be victimized by the negativity that many of us are being victimized by, or are just reacting to it. So,
that sounds great. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. As we wrap up here, Lisa, I feel like I could talk to you all day. So thank you for your time.
Ditto.
This is a question I'd love to ask my guests. I have learned that people who are living intentionally start their mornings out very intentionally. And sometimes it's very long routine. Sometimes it's super simple. I just love asking this question. What are your morning rituals?
Morning rituals. Let's see. I guess running around like a crazy person so I'm not late for my 8 a.m. classes is not what you mean, right?
Some days it's like that, isn't it, Lisa?
Some days it's like that. Yes. Some days it's like that.
It's not sustainable, is it?
No, it's not. I'm gonna make a stab at sounding super together and super spiritual, Heather, and say that on my good days, I'm actually right now working through the Old Testament book in the Bible called the Psalms, which were basically the prayers of the Old Testament and kind of the songs of the Old Testament, very personal. But I'm trying to read one a day in a couple different translations and just kind of get my mind kind of like what we were saying, beyond ourselves, but also be honest with myself. I find when I read the Psalms, because they're not narrative passages, they're not doctrinal passages, they're not historical passages, they're personal, right? They're people's prayers to God. So I found that starting off my morning that way helps me realize, okay, I'm like everyone else. God can help me.
Yes.
I can move forward, and I can have a life of meaning and do things that I'm excited about. And it just kind of gives me a little anchor. So I certainly don't accomplish it every day. Many days I am just running around crazy. And then I hit my Nespresso machine. That's my favorite coffee right now. But besides the Nespresso machine, when I am a little more together, I do like to start the day with that. That's what I've been working on recently.
Oh, I love it. And I'm with you. There's some days that I've got it together. Other days I don't, but I can tell you, I can feel when I'm running on fumes. At least I know what to return to. That's what I always tell people. I'm like, you don't have to get it perfect. Just recognize when you're running on fumes and you have something in place that you do that slows you down and gets your clarity back in order for you.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And if you build it into your life as a discipline, and that's something I've actually started talking to students more about, students of faith, or even those who aren't people of faith, having routines. And I'm sure you do it all the time in life coaching and your writing, have routines, because if it is a routine, and if it is kind of a quote unquote discipline, it is easier to fall back to it. And I love your comment. You don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to go back to it. I'm going to remember that one. That's a good one for me and for the students I work with.
Oh yeah. We just got to have something to reach for.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Lisa, it's been such a pleasure having you on my show today. Thanks so much for just taking the time and to go deep on some pretty cool issues. And I look forward to getting your book out. And then where can people find you?
They can find me. I do have a personal website. It's Lisa Ray Smith. That's RAE, LisaRaySmith.com. Okay. That has most of my stuff. It also has a link to some of my academic stuff, but that has my books. You can find my books on Amazon. The new book on George Whitfield is coming out with Square Halo Books, which is based in Baltimore. But yeah, if you go to the LisaRaySmith.com website, you can pretty much find everything there.
Oh, good. I will check that out. I can't wait to read. I want to pick up the other one about the women too.
Yeah, that one's fun because it's short and each chapter is just one woman. It's actually, you can even do it in a group study because it has like some study questions, or for yourself. It's a good way to just like focus on one personality trait and one person at the same time. So that one's fun.
Oh. Well, thank you, Lisa. And listeners, we just encourage you to go after that clarity, confidence, courage. We are behind you. We want to empower you. And I love Lisa's focus too on hope and passion and galvanizing that. Those were some words that I took away from our time today. So we're behind you all. Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We had such a great time today. And obviously, we are all stepping into this life that we're made for. But isn't it nice to have a little bit of support along the way? If you want to find out more about the life that you're made for, come find me at heatherpenny.com. Go ahead and subscribe. Give us a review. That really helps us out and helps spread the word. You get to step into the life that you're made for. Cheering you on.